How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is part 1 of What If Deku Had a Regeneration Quirk. And now, let's begin. Izuku would be born to the parents of Inko Midoriya and Hisashi Midoriya. However, that wasn't his parents' real name. They were the number 10 hero being Hisashi and the number 20 hero being Inko. They just wasn't their real names. They knew if they were going to go out in public, they needed fake names so that they wouldn't be recognized. They'd also have to have just disguises, different credit cards, and all these different types of things so people wouldn't recognize them on the street. And this especially came when they had a child with Zuku. So they needed to make sure nobody knew they had a child. And so they did this by having fake names. If no one knew they had a child, they couldn't have that used against them, say if a villain attack were to happen and they would capture Zuku. So Izuku would grow up quite the normal childhood for a kid. That was until he turned 4 years old. Izuku would jump out of his bed, banging on his parents' doors, yelling for them to wake up so they can go to the Quirk doctor's office so that he can find out what his cool quirk is going to be and so that he can become a hero. His parents would get up telling Izuku that the doctor office doesn't open for another hour, but it did take an hour to drive there, so they might as well go. So they would end up getting there an hour right as the doctor's office was open, as they would make an appointment for them to check what Izuku's quirk was, and since they were the only person there, they might as well just do it now. So they would be rushed into a quirk doctor's office as the doctor would then look down at Izuku, take a couple tests, and would take them to the lab. 30 minutes later, he would come back with some test results. He had to do everything rushed because they were on a tight schedule, and so if they needed to get these people in, get their quirk set, and then leave as soon as possible, so the person that made a set appointment at a set time could get in and do that instead of having to wait and leaving a bad review, which could tarnish the reputation of the office. So they would rush everything as the doctor would then come in with some bad news. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Midoriya and Mr. Midoriya. Your son here, Zuko, appears to be quirkless." Immediately, both the parents would say, "What do you mean? He can't be quirkless." They were expecting him to have a very powerful quirk. They were heroes, after all, and very high ranking heroes, too. So when they heard the fact that Izuku was quirkless, they couldn't believe it. It was insane. So immediately, Hisashi would grab Izuku's arm, yanking him up as Izuku would tell his father that hurt, but he wouldn't care, as he would tell Inko to get up as they would rush out of the office. The doctor looked sad by this, as he had saw this happen many, many times. It is something that happened so many times when he was being a doctor there. Every time he would tell a parent they had a quirkless child, something like this would happen, and he would never see that child back in their office again, for at least most cases, or if they did come back in the office, they would end up having bruise and signs of abuse, but he couldn't really do anything about that. He would just ask them if they fell or not, and they would say yes. He couldn't call the police because most of them had ties to the police and would just end up getting him fired, as he lived in quite a rich neighborhood, which these people had lots of influence, and if he were to say something otherwise, he would very easily either be killed or be thrown in jail. So he couldn't really do anything about it. So Izuku would be sitting in the car as he would look around completely scared. He had just been told he was quirkless, and both his parents were acting very strange. He couldn't figure out why they were acting like this. So Izuku would see them just driving the car in a completely opposite direction from where his house was, at least from the direction that he knew where his house was. So Izuku would be confused. He would see them enter a forest as he would look around, as he would finally look down out his window to see a very steep hill with a huge tree line at the bottom of it. So Izuku would then hear the car come to a stop. As he would look over to his window, as he would see his father already out of the car and yanking open his door, as he would grab Izuku's arm and would push him out, as then kicking his back down the hill, as Izuku would then come tumbling down the hill, crying out in pain, just reaching towards his mother and father, wanting them to help him, but they of course weren't. They had already gotten back in the car and had started to drive off. As Izuku would then hear a massive crunch. His back had hit the trunk of a tree, as he would then fall limp down at the base of that tree trunk, as Izuku couldn't even feel his legs, as he would reach out onto the hill, grabbing the side of it. He was in a massive amount of pain, but was trying his hardest not to scream at all, as he just had a feeling if he were to scream, he would probably end up dying. So he would end up climbing back up this hill slowly, and it hadn't rained in over 2 weeks. So the ground was extremely hard, as rocks were completely just stuck in it, and every time he would accidentally grab one, it would completely just tear off chunks of his skin. As Isuku would start to just climb up, as the dirt that was quite soft, even though it wasn't, there were still tiny patches of it where it was a tad bit soft, as it would start to get under his fingernails, as Izuku would continue to climb up until he reached the road. As he would just sit there, he would just pass out. He had used all his energy to get up the hill, and he had nowhere else to go. And he laid there. Multiple cars would pass, and finally, when it was pitch black, a car would then roll up and would see him there, as a woman would step out of the vehicle and would pick Izuku up. "Oh, you poor thing," the woman would say, putting Izuku into the van, as they would then drive off into just some strange building. It was an orphanage, as Izuku would then be sat in a bed in their medical unit, as Izuku would then be just kept in health, or at least tried to become back into good health. Izuku, by the time he woke up, his legs just could be used again. It was strange to have completely no feeling in his legs, but now there was feeling. It was quite strange. Izuku would end up looking up at the person that was standing next to him, looking down at him, as she would finally speak. "Oh, you're awake. Now, child, can you please tell me your name so I can hopefully try to find your parents?" "Oh, my name is Izuku Midoriya," Izuku would say, as the just caretaker of Izuku would shake her head, nodding it, saying, "Okay, I'll be back in a minute," as she would then leave the room and would walk into a massive room with a computer, as she would type in Izuku's name and would see that he was missing, along with both of his parents. So the lady would then look to where his quirk was listed, but would then frown. He was quirkless. She would immediately walk back into the room, glaring at Izuku, grabbing Izuku by the arm, as she would then yank Izuku and would walk Izuku over to a very dark door, as she would then push Izuku down the stairs into the basement of the orphanage. Immediately, Izuku could tell it was very moist there, as there was water running into a drain quite close to him, as Izuku could hear it. While he was asleep in a sort of coma, it had rained very hard, and the basement was sort of flooded by that, as Izuku would then look on and all around the walls, as he would see mold everywhere. It clearly was not kept in good health. And now let me give you guys some context. This world is a lot different from canon My Hero Academia. Quirkless people are looked down upon. It is insane how much they're just nobody cares about them. If you're quirkless, you are seen as trash, completely garbage in the eyes of society. And so since there is 20% of the population that is quirkless, 20% of the population is usually abused, and which leads to them end up dying at a very young age. So Izuku would end up looking around to see tons of other kids like him in this basement. You would see them just cowering in a corner as they would look on to see another one who would come. As Izuku would then look down and would sit there completely confused. As many weeks would pass, kids would come and go, and there was never a kid older than 6. As once they would make it into there, they would all end up dying before they turned 6. They might last to the age of 5, but they never would last to 6. And no kid would come in there at the age of 6 or 7. All of their parents would have ended up killing them by then or throwing them in some random orphanage just to be mistreated by some random caretaker. So Izuku would be sitting there just distraught. He would see his friends would end up coming in. He would make friends with them, but they would then end up dying all around him. However, he would still end up surviving. It was quite strange. Why was he the only one surviving while all the other kids were dying around him? Why is that the case? Izuku couldn't explain it at all. So Izuku would just be left to sit there in his own thoughts as he would stop making friends with them. He didn't want to lose them like he had lost the friends before him and his mother and father. So he started to push away his friends that he already had, as he would end up losing the friends he didn't want to lose. It was just a lose lose situation, as Izuku would then last there until the age of 9, when he would end up hear the door opening as someone would walk down there. As Izuku just thought it was a mealtime, as he was expecting the just leftovers of all of the kids upstairs who had not finished their meals to just be thrown down there in the disgusting water. However, that wasn't the case. He would just be yanked out of where he was sitting as they would end up walking up the creaky stairs, as Izuku would look down on all of the other Quirkless kids as he would see how they were treated like animals, how he was treated like no better than some pig found on a farm, just being thrown this slop food that has no nutritional value to them, which would make them have stunted growth. Izuku, however, didn't have this. He had a quirk which no one knew about. He was the oddball out from everyone else that was in that basement. As Izuku would finally then be yanked up, as this woman would then speak to him. You somehow lasted until you're 9, which doesn't appear to happen. So I guess you deserve to be up here for a little bit, but don't get used to it. Izuku would look around, seeing furniture. There was no furniture down there, and he hadn't seen it since he was 4. He was completely astonished. Everything looked so much crazier from what the basement was for the last 5 years of his life. As Izuku would then walk around seeing kids playing, but when they saw him, they would run away. Izuku looked like a complete monster to the other kids who were kept clean and tidy, while Izuku was left down there to rot with the other quirkless kids. So Izuku would then just look like a demon to everyone else, as they would start calling him names like a demon, hoping that would push him away from them, and so he wouldn't go near them. As Izuku would just be walking around. When dinner time finally came, he would sit on the ground, not having a chair to sit at. Some kids, feeling sympathy for him, would try to feed him, but he would never accept this, as he would learn that people that did feed him, and when he was caught with food like this, people who were caught feeding him would end up being punished, as they would end up going into a room much like the basement, but they would never come out of it. Izuku would watch the doors wanting for someone who felt sympathy for him to come out of that room, but they never would. Of course, they would end up coming out of that room, but in just not what was their body. They came out of the room in a trash bag, as Izuku didn't know this. He was confused why they never came out of that room, and he would finally end up learning that as he was caught doing something that was against the rules he was never told about, as he would be taken into that room. And that's where I'm going to leave this what if off, guys. I hope you all did enjoy this first what if since my massive break, and it's the first what if of March, so I hope you guys did enjoy it. I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.